Adding trim is of course an optional step, but this is the difference in what these roofs would look like with and without trim. And I just kind of like the look that the trim gives it, kind of a little finished look. And then here's what it looks like on a round tower. So to do the trim, I'm using some of this paper from the 6-inch pad. We use this on the interior structure, on the walls there, and also as some trim on the annex. Now this time I'm not coloring it. I want that contrast. You could of course color it if you wanted to. I'm just cutting thin little strips here of this, basically a checker's width. And we need two different kinds of strips, some that are backed with score tape and some that are not. So for the ones that are, I'm just laying out some score tape on the back here before I cut them. It's always advisable when you're working with something that has score tape on it to anchor that piece down before you cut. That score tape just makes it very slippery. And then come in and line up your craft knife blade with the edge of those squares. And cut that off. And then I never like to see that white paper, so I'm just using my, it's easier to do this I find with a big marker like a wide tip Copic or something like that. And these strips have some stiffness to them because of the score tape backing, so they're really not that hard to color if you use a wide marker like this. They are a little trickier to color if you only have a narrower marker, but with the brush tip that's possible as well. So we'll use ones with score tape on the back to do any of the rectangular or square pyramid type roofs. And then for the cone roofs, I have another piece that I just haven't added any score tape to the back, and I'll cut strips from that the same way. They just don't have any score tape on the back, and that's what we'll use for the cone roofs. So let's start by working on one of our pyramid or square roofs, and I like to bring an edge of black ink just up slightly on the front there, just in case the we don't get the strips all the way to the bottom. So I find that easier to do with my broad Copic marker here because I can control that more easily than using a thin marker, but use whatever tools work the best for you. Then I'm just kind of checking here on the bottom and making sure that everything is nice and inked on the bottom. Sometimes the paper overhangs just a little bit. Then I think you can see on this one that I have inked the edges a little bit. You can either do that now or later, it doesn't matter. So to add these strips on a rectangular shape, they can sit flat. That's why we added the score tape. And all I'm going to do to start with is just cut a little bit of an angle to match the angle of the roof. And then remove the backing. And start right there at that corner. And line up the bottom edge. And come over here to the other side. And then with some sharp detail scissors, I can come right along that edge and give that a snip. And then I will come back, and where I made that little cut, just hit that with some black ink. Now I always like to work in the same direction, so this angle that's on this end here is opposite of what I want, so I'm just going to cut it back the opposite direction and put some black ink on that before I start, and then continue with the next side. Try to match up that corner as neatly as possible. Now after doing the second side, I just have a small piece left. You can choose to use this piece or not. I'm going to use it, and I'll just make sure that I have my end dark here. And I'm just making sure also that I'm ending on a square. And then I'll just put that piece on. And then when I pick up my next piece, I'll check that it's starting with alternating the square. So here I just need to trim this end off so that I'll start with a tan square, color my end, and pick right up where I left off. I'll just continue around the base here until I'm done. And so that's how to do one of the pyramid shaped roofs. For the cone shaped roofs, we'll again start by using our marker and going all the way around the bottom and coming up just a tad on the outside or edge of that bottom. And then we'll want to check to see if one strip is going to be enough to go around the cone. Now for some of the smaller ones it may be, and for some of the larger ones it obviously won't be. Now for this is one of the center wall tower roofs, and it is going to be long enough. So since that's the case, I'm just going to start it back here at the seam line, and I'm going to do that by just putting about a ½ inch of glue, and it's really close to that bottom edge. And then I'll take my strip and attach it flush with that bottom edge. Now the entire strip can't get glued down because remember this is a curved surface, so you're basically just gluing the bottom edge of that right here underneath my thumb. So I'm going to just hold that for a few seconds until that's nicely attached. And once that's attached, I'm just going to work in, I would say about 1 inch increments, and lay down a piece of glue right next to that bottom edge, and then work that next section on, making sure it's getting aligned with that bottom edge, and just hold that with a little pressure, and then come in and do the next inch, and just continue to do that to work your way around. Now when I'm about a ½ inch from the end, I'll stop. I won't put any glue on that final ½ inch, and I'll just see where that end is and how it's going to meet. In this one I just need to trim off one of the little squares here, and then I'll hit that end with a little ink, and then I can put my final band of glue down, and finalize the trim. And just hold some pressure on there. Now you'll notice if you look from above that and it may not all be exactly perfect, but that the top edge isn't sticking to the cone. And that's of course because this is slanted and the strip is straight. I think it's okay. It's not possible to use this particular piece of trim and cut it in a circle. But I like, it looks fine to me, so hopefully it does to you too. So once you put some pressure on that, then you can just set that aside to cure. So it's pretty obvious that for the large round tower, that roof, that one strip isn't going to go around. And I just checked for the front corner tower roof, and I don't think one strip will go around as well. So I think it will be easier to do this if we make one long strip. So what I've done is I've got two strips here. I'm just going to put some glue, I would say over 2 squares worth of one strip, and then using the a line on my craft mat, I'll overlap that, just checking that I've got my squares in the right orientation here so that that is not noticeable. And I'll just put some pressure on that. And then you'll have one long strip to work with, which will be a lot easier than when you're working around the cone to be able to keep on going. Now, if you think that that joint is noticeable, I can't hardly tell where it is, but if you think it's noticeable, just when you put your placement on these larger cones, put that joint somewhere where it won't be so noticeable. But for me, I don't really see it. So here are all the roofs trimmed. The only roof that I did not put any trim on was the slanted annex roof, but all of the tower roofs have trim. I'm also going to use the same trim around the base of all the building components, or at least most of the building components. And I'm going to start here with our interior structure, and I'm going to, these are my same pieces of this trim that we used for the roof. I have them all backed with score tape. And I'll start here on the back side and continue around, wrap to the front, and I'll just end it where the decorative paper ends here, and then put a little strip over here on the side. It does contrast a little bit since this is not inked, so I'll run that around there. So I've run my trim around on the interior structure. And now for the annex, I'm going to run it from the corner, the back corner, up to that trim, and from that trim back to this corner. I'll also take my black marker and just hit that bottom edge there so that we won't see any, if the trim doesn't go all the way to that bottom. So here's the trim on the annex. Next I'll work on the tall tower. And for the tall tower, we don't need to put any trim around the part where this fits into the notch. So I'm just fitting that into the notch, and then I'll run the trim from where it meets that notch all the way around to where it meets the notch on the other side. And I'll again use my black marker on the bottom before I put that trim on. So I think you can see how I held it back from that corner. There's nothing on this side, and this is the side with my arrow that's going to get attached to the structure, and then it might be hard to see, but this is again held back from the corner over here. So that's the trim for the tall tower. Now I'm ready to work on the back corner towers, and I've kept the interior structure here because, again, just like with the tall tower, we don't need to run any trim where these pieces fit into those notches. So I'll just line them up, get them how I want them. If you haven't already marked for where your walls are going to go and which one is left and right, this would be a good time to do that. And then we'll just ink the bottom and then start the trim back from where those notches are on either one. Now when I put this trim on, I started where that notch is, and then I just continued around, bending around the corners, coming all the way around here. And this is 1/6" piece that I used here. Now it's actually a little bit short of where this notch is back here, but that's going to be covered up by a wall, so I'm not going to bother to fill that in there. So I just use a 6" piece and start and bend around the corners. Now for the round towers, I'll again blacken the bottom edge with ink and then use a strip to go completely around the towers. Now for these larger front corner towers, one strip won't go quite all the way around, but that back won't show. So just kind of hold up one strip around the edge there. And mine probably don't meet by about 1 inch. Let me hold it up backwards and then you can see it a little bit better, I think. So I think you can see there's about 1 inch gap there or so. So I'm just going to start it 1/2 inch away from the center seam so that that middle inch on the back by the seam won't have any trim, and it won't show because it's towards the interior of the structure. And for all the other towers, I'll just start at the back seam and cut it off when I get all the way around. And here are the round towers with their base trim. Now for our courtyard towers and pedestals. Actually, we don't need it to go around all 4 sides of the courtyard towers, but I think it's just easier to do it so that we don't have to think about it when we go to put them on. So I'll go around all 4 sides of the bases on the courtyard towers, and I've already gone on the edge with my black marker. And then for the 2 pedestals, we only need to go on this side that has the paper, and I'll probably wrap it, probably just even with those 2 tabs on each side, but there's no need to go around the remainder of the pedestal. Here are the courtyard towers and pedestals with their trim, and I think you can see that on the pedestals I decided to also put a row of trim right up along that top edge there. I just decided I like that. You can leave it off or add it as you see fit. And just so that you don't think that I forgot them, here are the 2 turrets, but I have elected not to put any trim on the 2 turrets.